you guys today, every one of you. Glad you were able to make it here to North Hills Church. You know why it's a good thing you're here at North Hills Church? Because God's here. That's the number one reason, because He, whenever we say, Lord, we want to meet with you, He meets with us. Jesus said it, when one or more people are gathered in the name of Jesus, He is there with us, right? So that's the number one best reason, is that you can meet Jesus here at North Hills Church today. And as you do, as you come with that purpose and with that awareness in your heart, what you actually do is you help other people. You help other people to come into His presence as well. How many of you were here last week for the kids program? There's a great weight on this side of the... It wasn't really the kids program, it was the children and the youth leading North Hills in worship. And it was awesome. Thank you guys so much. And I heard that Nicholas had the children's story, right? I heard that he was a little worried that he told a children's story that the pastor was preaching on. You told it a lot better than I did, so. And when you did that, you laid the foundation. So we're expecting more greatness out of this group over here. So what a great story, Nicholas. Again, thank you so much for that. And I have a story for you this week as well. But before I do that, I want to read a verse for you. It's found in Psalm 20. I'm sorry, not Psalm 20. It's found in Isaiah 41:9. This is what it says. I took you from the ends of the earth, from its farthest corners I called you. I said, you are my servant. I have chosen you and have not rejected you. I want to remind you of, if you haven't heard of, and if you have heard of it, or if you haven't heard of it, I want to share with you the story of Moses and the call of Moses in the wilderness. And you might think that this verse is just about Moses, but it's not. We'll talk about that in a moment. So first, I want to recount the story. It's found in chapters 3 and chapters 4 of Exodus. And I mentioned earlier that Moses found himself 40 years out in the desert tending sheep. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to read this. If you have a Bible, this is from the NLT, or you can read it in your own version, read along with it. But it's a great story. It's one of the greatest stories in the Bible. And it's one of the oldest stories, and yet it feels so fresh. So here we go. Chapter 3. I'm going to start with verse 4 because Moses is out in the wilderness with the sheep, and he sees a bush that's burning, and he's curious, so he goes over to the bush. Many scholars have suggested that his curiosity wasn't about a burning bush in the Sinai wilderness. It was about the fact that the bush just kept burning. Now, I don't know. One day I'm going to ask Moses, why did you go over to that bush? But anyway, in the bush was God, or the Lord. So it says in verse 4, when the Lord saw Moses coming to take a closer look, God called to him from the middle of the bush, Moses, Moses. Here I am, Moses replied. Do not come any closer, the Lord warned. Take off your sandals, for you are standing on holy ground. We had a funeral here a week ago yesterday, and it was a Fijian funeral, and they put all kinds of cloths beneath the casket, and I understand it's kind of like holy ground kind of idea. Well, this was a burning bush, holy ground. And so he says, don't come any closer, take your shoes off. In some religious traditions, everybody has to take their shoes off at the door. Can you imagine? We need a ministry just to manage the shoes at North Hills Church. And so God speaks to Moses in verse 6, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. When Moses heard this, he covered his face because he was afraid to look at God. Then the Lord told him, I have certainly seen the oppression of my people in Egypt. I have heard their cries of distress because of their harsh slave drivers. Yes, I am aware of their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the power of the Egyptians and lead them out of Egypt into their own fertile and spacious land. Now go, want you to count how many goes there are in this story. Now go, for I am sending you to Pharaoh. You must lead my people Israel out of Egypt. But Moses protested to God. You can also count how many protesteds there are. But Moses protested to God. Who am I to appear before Pharaoh? Who am I to lead the people of Israel out of Egypt? Verse 12, God answered, I will be with you, and this is your sign that I am the one who has sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God at this very mountain. He was at Mount Sinai, right? We know Mount Sinai for what? 10 Commandments. Thank you. Somebody's a good Bible student. He was at Mount Sinai. You will worship me. You will worship God at this very mountain. But Moses protested. There it is again. If I go to the people of Israel and tell them the God of your ancestors has sent me to you, they will ask me, well, what is his name? Then what should I tell them? God replied to Moses, I am who I am. Say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent you. God also said to Moses, say this to the people of Israel, Yahweh, or I am that I am, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. Now go and call together all the elders of Israel. I am that I am. You guys know what that is? It's called the Tetragrammaton. I don't know what that means, except that it's a word that stands for the Hebrew word for God, or this Hebrew word for God's name, Yahweh. YWHW. No, YHWH, sorry. In the Hebrew written language, there aren't any vowels, and so they just have the consonants. YHWH. We say Yahweh. Translators have translated it as Jehovah in the English language. This is the most holy name in all of the Hebrew language, all of the Hebrew scriptures. It's so holy, they won't write it. Observant Jews won't write it. They won't speak it. They won't even think it. And they use other words like Adonai and so forth. So when he says this to Moses, this is a big deal. I am who I am. But Moses protested again, chapter 4. What if they won't believe me or listen to me? What if they say, the Lord never appeared to you? What if they say, you are lying? God never showed up to you. He never spoke to you. What if they say that, Moses says? Then the Lord asked him, what is that in your hand? Good question. What is that in your hand? This whole sermon series is about that very thing. What is the only thing you have? Sometimes we're reduced down to something in our relationship with God where we just have one thing. Something basic, something simple. God says to Moses out there in the Sinai desert, he says, what do you have in your hand? Moses holds up a rod, a staff. A shepherd's staff, Moses replied. God says, throw it down on the ground. The Lord told him. So Moses threw it down on the ground. And it turned into a snake. Now I asked Tim, our drummer, he has snakes at home. Have you ever thrown a stick down and have it turn into a snake? And he said, not when he was in his right mind, no. Moses, no doubt, it says Moses jumped back. So I love this story. Very descriptive in Exodus. This is where the law comes from. This is where religion comes from. And the Bible is saying Moses got scared and he jumped back from the snake that used to be a stick. Then the Lord told him in verse 4, reach out and grab its tail. Now, Tim, if you had a poisonous snake, would you ever just reach out and grab it by the tail? No, and why not? Because snakes are very flexible, right? And they have this habit of coming around and biting you if you grab them by the tail. One time when I was living in Tennessee, I went out into the barn out back of our house, and I was moving some things out of the barn, and there was a big barrel there that it was one of these cardboard barrels with a metal lid on it, and I went out there to move it, and the lid had been off, so I opened the lid, and I went to take some things out, and as soon as I did, I had a snake on my hand. Fortunately, it wasn't copper-colored. That's the kind of poisonous snakes they have in Tennessee. It was black. It was a rat snake, but he still bit me. You don't pick up a snake by its tail. But Moses, because he's talking to God, he does what God says. So Moses reached out, grabbed it, and it turned back into a shepherd's staff in his hand. But what does the word "but" do to everything you said before? Pretty much negates it, right? But, okay, so his shepherd's staff goes on the ground, turns into a snake. He picks it up by the tail, turns back into a shepherd's staff. The next word is, but Moses pleaded with the Lord, "Oh, Lord, I'm not very good with words." I've heard that from a few of you occasionally. I don't know how to talk up front. I never have been, Moses says. I'm not now. Even though you have spoken to me, I get tongue-tied and my words get tangled. Then the Lord asked Moses, "Well, who makes a person's mouth? Who decides whether people speak or do not speak? Whether they hear or do not hear, see or do not see? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go. I will be with you as you speak, and I will instruct you in what you say." How many goes is that? Anybody counting? Okay, it's 3. Now go. I will be with you as you speak, and I will instruct you in what to say. But, there it is again, but Moses again pleaded, "Lord, please send anyone else." Then the Lord became angry with Moses. Some of us grew up with a picture of God as being angry all the time. And then we learned in wonderful churches like North Hills about the grace of God and the love of God and the compassion of God and the kindness of God. And it was like, God doesn't get angry with us. He's long-suffering. He's patient. He loves us. It says here in Exodus 4, then the Lord became angry with Moses. I think Moses was pushing him to the limit, don't you? But notice the next words. It says, the Lord became angry with Moses. All right, he said. God is not happy with Moses, obviously, but then he says, okay, what about your brother Aaron, the Levite? He's a preacher. Preachers never are short on words. Talk to him, talk to him and put the words in his mouth. I will be with both of you as you speak. That's verse 15. And I will instruct you both in what to do. Later on in this same chapter, God says to Moses and Aaron, now go, one more time. 4 times God says no. 4 times God says no. No, God says go. God says go. I took you from the ends of the earth, it says. I have chosen you and have not rejected you. There's 2 things that Moses was when you think about it. First of all, Moses was a miracle. Moses was a miracle. You know from the story of Moses how when he was born there was this edict in the land that all the baby boys in Egypt were going to be killed. Pharaoh was afraid of the growth of the Hebrews, and so he figured the way to do that was to get rid of all the baby makers, or half of the baby makers, as babies before they ever grew up and were able to make more babies, because the Hebrews loved to have kids. I mean, if you didn't have a child in the Hebrew culture, you were considered to be cursed by God. So the more the merrier. The more kids you had, the better off you were. And the Hebrews were growing to be much larger part of the population than the Egyptians were. So Pharaoh said, all the baby boys have got to be killed. Sounds pretty harsh to us, but it's the way that ancient civilizations took care of threats from time to time. Moses was a miracle. He was just born when this edict came out, and he should have died. But his mother made a little boat, gave it to his older sister, said, go watch this in the river, down by the river. We'll put him in the rushes, just to protect him, just to keep the soldiers from coming and killing him. He was saved by his mother and his sister, but then a princess came by and she literally saved him and took him into her home. And so he was a miracle, just the fact that he lived. And then he was a miracle because he grew up not in slavery, not in poverty, but he grew up in wealth and privilege and all the advantages of the royal family. He grew up being from the wrong ethnic background in a racist nation. Did you ever think about that? Moses was Hebrew, right? But he lived in the house of the Egyptians. And did the Egyptians like the Hebrews? Not that particular administration. They hated the Egyptians. They wanted to use them and control them and contain them as much as possible. So he was a miracle in the fact that even though his ethnic background was he was the wrong color, he's in the middle of the royal household that hates his people. He survived. Not only did he survive, but he thrived. He was loved. He was cared for. He was nurtured. He was a miracle in that he was educated, had the best education possible. He was multilingual. He learned leadership from the world's best men. He was being groomed, in fact, I believe, to lead the most powerful nation on earth. He was a miracle. But Moses was also a mess. He was a disaster. Moses was so full of inner conflicts. Can you imagine how he felt? As he grew older, he became aware of the differences between him and the other Egyptians. Somewhere along the line, he must have found out that he was a Hebrew. Then when he was like 40 years old, he killed a man thinking that he would end up a hero with his own people. And his own people said, "Get away from us. We don't want anything to do with you." They rejected him. So he ran away. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't brave. He didn't face the Pharaoh. He ran away. He was a coward. At least he probably told himself that. And then he became a shepherd. Now we have ideas of shepherds as elevated, beautiful, pastoral scenes, the man watching the sheep out on the hillside. But shepherds in Moses' day were not at the top of the economic structure. They were pretty much at the bottom. That was one of the worst jobs you could have. And not only was he a shepherd, but he lived out in the desert with a bunch of sheep. And then he married out of his race. He married out of his country and his comfort. And he spent 40 years, the next 40 years after he killed this Egyptian, wondering what went wrong in his life, beating himself up, trying to figure out why he failed so miserably. So when God came calling, it's no mystery that Moses was full of excuses. These two chapters that I read parts of are the excuse chapters in the Bible. All kinds of excuses here. Today we have 5 excuses I want you to think about that Moses gave to God when God came calling to him. You'd think of all the people in that day and age, why would God come to Moses? First of all, Moses said, "Please excuse me because I'm a nobody." Who am I? I am a nobody. And at the core of our lives, for many of us, identity is such a big issue. And many people think, I'm nobody. I can't do this. I'm not significant at all. But God says, I am somebody, and I'm the one sending you. Deuteronomy 31:8, later in Moses' life, he tells the people of Israel this: "The Lord himself goes before you and will be with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged." You feel like a nobody? Moses did too. Moses did too, but God came calling him there in the middle of the desert in that burning bush. The next excuse was this: I don't have any authority. I have no authority. Who's going to listen to me? Why would anybody follow me or do what I say? I have no authority. Moses knew what worldly authority was all about. He knew what political authority was. He knew what the authority of wealth. If a person is rich, they can do all kinds of things. People will listen to them. They'll follow them. He knew what the authority of training and family association was. But the only authority that mattered in this interaction, God with Moses and God's calling to him, was this. It was the name of the Lord. That was all the authority he needed. He didn't need his own authority. He didn't need the authority of Pharaoh. He didn't need the authority of the royal household. He just needed to know that he was going in the name of the Lord. It's the only authority he needed. Here's a verse in Psalm 27. Some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we trust in what? The name of the Lord our God. There's a lot of people today who put their trust in the power of our nation. They put their trust in the power of technology to protect them. They put their trust in all kinds of things. But God says, don't put your trust in anything except me. We trust in the name of the Lord. Notice that word Lord is capitalized. It actually stands for the Tetragrammaton, Yahweh. The I am that I am is our God. I am that I am. It's the only authority we need. The third excuse Moses gave was this: no one is going to believe me. No one's going to listen to me. Who am I? I have no authority, and no one's going to listen to me anyway because I can't talk. It's interesting that this isn't just Moses' problem, but it's God's problem too when you think about it. How many people actually listen to God? How many people hear what he says? Who really pays attention? Jesus faced this through his whole life. He faces through his whole life. This is what he said to the unbelieving Jews of his day. Don't believe me unless I carry out my Father's work. But if I do his work, believe in the evidence of the miraculous works I have done, even if you don't believe me. If you can't believe me because you're so prejudiced that you think that I'm just an imposter, then believe in what you see me doing. What you do in the name of Christ is going to speak for itself. What you do in the power of God is going to speak for itself. You can't argue with the works of God. When we've prayed for people here at North Hills and they've been healed, you can't argue with that. You can say, well, I think this is the way that the world is. This is the way the universe works. This is what I believe. You can say whatever you want to about belief, but you can't argue with what God does when his people act in his name and in his power. Human beings have the choice whether to believe or not to believe. Remember the story of that Jesus told about the rich man and Lazarus? The rich man and Lazarus, who was a poor man, and how this poor man sat at the gate of a rich man and begged for a little bit of food day by day, and the rich man ignored him and despised him, and one day the poor man died, and he went to the bosom of Abraham. That's how the story goes. And then the rich man died, and he didn't go to the bosom of Abraham. He went to hell. And so in the story, the rich man's trying to get God to let Lazarus come over and give him some water because it's really hot and he's thirsty. Jesus told this story, by the way. And so God says, no, the gulf is too great. I can't send him over there. And he says, well, then what I want you to do is send him back into life. I want you to give him his life back so that he can go back and warn my brothers of how bad it is in hell. And God said, well, if you don't believe Moses and you don't believe the prophets, if they don't believe what's right before them, why would they believe someone who came from the dead? Belief is a choice that we make. The fourth excuse that Moses gave was this: I don't know what to say. I have no idea what I'm supposed to say. I just don't know. And as you hear Moses giving all these reasons why he can't do what God says, you hear fear, right? Don't you think that most of our excuses to God flow out of fear? We're afraid that this might happen. We're afraid no one will listen to us. We're afraid no one will believe us. We're afraid that we'll just look like a fool. We're afraid of all kinds of things. We're afraid we'll fail. We're afraid that in our failure we'll just be nothing. We're just insignificant. We've talked about this before. And if you're in Celebrate Recovery or any recovery program, you've heard this before. The word fear has about 62 or 65 meanings if you look it up, the acronyms for fear. And one of the most well-known ones is fear stands for false evidence appearing real. We see something that we think is real, but it's not real. And so we're afraid of what isn't even real, false evidence appearing real. Here's what God says, Jeremiah 1:7. I'll tell you where to go, and you'll go there. I'll tell you what to say, and you'll say it. Don't be afraid of a soul. God's going to put the words in our mouths. God said, I'll put the words in your mouth, Moses. Don't worry about what you're going to say. God's going to put the right words in your mouth. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. The last excuse really isn't an excuse. It's just Moses coming as close as he can to saying no without actually saying no. Verse 13 in chapter 4 says, can't you find someone else? Can't you find someone else? He's just blatantly begging off. And he's so close. This is why God starts getting angry. Moses doesn't just say no. He says, well, there's got to be someone else, Lord. Please, just find someone else. And that's when the Scripture says God got angry. 1 Peter 2:9 says this, though. When we think in our minds, there's got to be someone else to do this. There's got to be someone else who has more resources, who has more talent, who can speak better, who isn't afraid to get up front, or who isn't afraid to do something that's never been done. 1 Peter 2:9 says, you are a chosen people. Do you know who Peter was talking about when he wrote this? Every single believer in Jesus Christ. You are a chosen people. You are a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of Him who called you out of darkness into His wonderful light. Now, some people think that God has called them to do all kinds of things. The way that you can tell if it has anything to do with God is, does it qualify for this calling of you may declare the praises of Him who called you out of darkness into His wonderful light. Everything that God calls us to do. It doesn't matter if it's a ministry within a church or if it's an outreach outside of the church. Everything God calls us to do has this at its core, that we may declare the praises of the one who called you out of the darkness and into the light. Well, I guess we got to experience that in order to appreciate it, don't we? There's a lot of people who don't know that because they haven't really known the difference between what is the darkness and what is the light. Everyone, though, every Christian, every believer, that means all of you who are believers here today, everyone is called for something, for some purpose. Moses was chosen by God. What Moses failed to see was that everything in his life, everything that he had experienced and gone through, everything he had learned in his life was being used to prepare him for this very moment. God couldn't have used him if he was dead, right? So God preserved him. He kept him alive. He sent the princess to adopt him. God couldn't use him to lead a great nation out of slavery if he had no training, so he put him in the world's finest schools and made a military commander out of him. Moses might not have known how to give a speech, but he certainly knew how to lead people. God couldn't use him for a spiritual as well as a physical liberation of his people while he was so arrogant and self-sufficient as he showed up that day when he killed the Egyptian. So God sent him out into the desert to tend sheep, just like watching after wayward people for 40 years. God couldn't use him if he kept giving excuses. So every excuse Moses gave, God took it away. Reminds me of my wife. Every excuse I give her, she takes it away. No excuses. Okay, it's a reason. No reasons. Moses was saying to God, all I have left is this shepherd's staff, nothing else. And God said, watch what I can do with that ugly stick in your hand. He turned it into a poisonous serpent. And he turned it into a rod of change. And he turned it into a staff of leadership, of healing, of miracles. Watch what I can do with the little you have. With the only thing that you have. Watch what I can do with that. So let's talk about you. You know, you don't get to come to church and just learn about Moses. It's got to be about you and me, right? God doesn't just tell us stories. He tells us stories for a reason. Because he wants us to learn. So first of all, here's a couple of questions I want you to think about. What makes you run from God's call? Now, I said that every Christian is chosen by God, is called for something. And depending on how far along you are in your relationship with God, there are a lot of you here who've heard that call, but you're pushing it back. Or you're turning and going the other direction. What is it that makes you run from the call of God? And then number two, what staff of leadership is God handing to you? What is he telling you? This is what I want you to do. This is what I want you to lead. And being a leader doesn't mean you have 1,000 people following you. If you just have one or two, you can be a leader by being a parent. You can be a leader by in school standing up for what's right. And other kids will see that you believe in God and they see God in you and they follow that example. There's so many ways that God wants us to lead. What is the staff of leadership that God is handing to you today? When you think about those two questions, let's put together with that what we talked about Moses in the first place. We said he was a mess. What makes you a mess today? What in your life is really messy and it makes you ashamed, it makes you afraid, makes you embarrassed, or makes you hold back? See, we say this, we quote from Romans 3. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And it's almost as if we use that as a way of getting out of change in our lives. You know, I'm a sinner. Do you know what happens to sinners? Do you know what happens to sinners who don't turn to God? Anybody? What happens to? Where do they end up? Don't want to say it, do you? They end up lost, depending upon the religious tradition that you come from. You could say they end up in hell, and I think Adventists could say that if they understand hell correctly. You end up lost. Your life ended forever. It's gone. You're done. That's how serious it is to be a sinner. That's how serious it is to sin. And so when we say your life is a mess, think of it in that context. What in your life keeps you away from God? What in your life interposes between you and the call that God is making to you? Believe me, in my life, I got plenty of messes. Not pretty, not good. And it's small comfort to look around at you and say, well, you got them too. Because in the end, it's going to be God and me, not God and me and you, you know. What are the messes in your life? What makes you a mess? And then the first one we start off with, on the other hand, what makes you a miracle? I believe that there are many of you here today who are here because God literally, physically has saved your life at some point in your life. He has intervened, protected you, and brought you here to this place today. What is it in your life that is a miracle? I can look around and see miracles here today. So don't get too worried about the sin part. Think about, or the mess part. Think about the miracle part. Think about the miracle part. And I can say to you, well, actually, I won't say it to you. I'm going to show you a video. You can draw your own conclusion. And as you watch this video, I want you to think about why you might be running away from God's call to you to lead your family or lead a new ministry or lead out in some way to bless or help or teach or guide other people. What are your excuses? I want you to think about that. And what is God calling you to? And realize, what is it that makes you an absolute miracle? Just watch this video. You and I know the name of Moses because Moses stopped saying no to God. He stopped saying, find someone else. He believed God enough to reach out and to take his hand. Say, God, I don't know how you can deal with the mess in my life, but if you've called me to this, I'm going to follow you. Let's go back to our first verse. Isaiah 41:9. Now I want you to hear this for yourself. I took you from the ends of the earth, from its farthest corners I called you. I said, you are my servant. I have chosen you and not rejected you. What has God chosen you to do for Him? What is God calling you today to do? Let's pray. Lord, as I look out in this congregation, I realize there are some amazing miracles, some that have happened, some waiting to happen. There is a calling that you have for every person who comes to you in faith. And what you are about to do with the young people that I see here, the middle-aged ones and the old ones, is nothing short of absolute miracle. But it will never happen, God, if we don't take the time to stop and to pay attention to whatever the burning bush is in our way. Wherever it is we hear your voice, to stop and to listen to that. And so, God, we pray today, right now. And I pray for each one here that you will help us to hear you. That all the noise and all the distraction and the chaos around us, to be able to hear you clearly speaking to us. Help us to learn to listen to you.